I was looking at some recent high-resolution aerial footage of the Florida coastline, specifically focusing on the sprawling estate of Mar-a-Lago. It's a place that radiates a sense of permanent, defiant authority, all gold leaf, manicured hedges, and high-stakes meetings. To the people walking those halls, power is something negotiated through deals, rhetoric, and sheer force of will. It feels like a fortress built to withstand any political storm. But as I watched the tide pulse against the seawall, I realized they were ignoring a much more indifferent form of power. There's a profound irony in the fact that one of the world's most vocal skeptics in the climate debate has chosen to anchor his life in a region that is essentially a future reef. When you listen to the rhetoric surrounding these circles, there's often a certain giddy confidence, a feeling that the climate narrative is just another political lever to be pulled or dismissed. They treat the rising ocean like a rival candidate they can outmaneuver, or a headline they can bury with a well-timed tweet. To them, the debate is a game of human hands. But then you look at the physical reality and the scene shifts. Physics doesn't have a seat at the negotiating table. It doesn't care about polling numbers, and it certainly doesn't vote. If the ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, which lock away nearly 90% of the world's ice, were to fully collapse, we aren't just talking about a few soggy basements. We are talking about a 70-meter rise in sea level. At that point, the map of Florida doesn't just change, it vanishes. Mar-a-Lago doesn't just get wet, it becomes a deep-sea relic. It's a bizarre contradiction, clinging to the prestige of the land while dismissing the very forces guaranteed to reclaim it. This instantaneous shift from the perceived stability of political power to the absolute vulnerability of our geography is where the real story begins. Because while we spend our time arguing over slogans, the ice is performing its own silent, irreversible calculation. And geography, unlike politics, never negotiates.
Wow. That is, that's a heavy way.
It feels inevitable. And we're so used to hearing about climate change as this, this political football.
Right.
But when you strip away the pundits and just look at the raw physics of it, it's genuinely terrifying.
Right.
But here's the thing, and this is why I wanted to start with that specific reading.
Okay.
Usually when we talk about geography not negotiating, we're talking about the future. We're talking about carbon emissions, erosion, the next 50, 100 years.
Standard timeline. We broke it, and now we're starting to see the consequences.
But this stack of sources we've been going through, it just flips that entire script on its head. I spent the last few days buried in this stuff, and I have to be honest, I feel like I've been reading a history book from a parallel dimension. These documents suggest that the negotiation with the Earth's geography, it didn't just start with the Industrial Revolution. They suggest it happened a long time ago, and that we, humanity, we already lost.
It's a massive shift in perspective. And I think we should be clear about what we're diving into here. This isn't your standard climate report. We aren't looking at IPCC graphs or UN projections. We are looking at, urban excavation records from the mid-19th century that they don't make any sense. We're looking at geological surveys that completely contradict the textbooks. We even have leaked correspondence about operations in Antarctica that sound more like science fiction than actual science.
And some of it challenges the very calendar we use to measure time. We've got transcripts from Aged and Pro, we've got these deep dives into something called the Mud Flood, and then there's this overarching theory of a lost global civilization called Tartaria.
So the mission here really is to explore this core tension. On one side, you have the official narrative we all learn.
Gradual change, linear progress. We came from caves, we built huts, then castles, then these gleaming skyscrapers.
And on the other side, looking at these sources, you have a narrative of catastrophic resets. The idea that the Earth just swallows civilizations whole, that technology is stolen rather than invented, and that the rising seas might not be a new threat caused by our SUVs, but a recurring mechanism of erasure.
So let's get right into the mud. Literally, I want to start with a story that popped up in the research that really anchors this whole concept. It's about a man named Elias. And I want to paint the picture here, because this isn't just a data point. It's a guy's life unraveling as he digs.
This is the surveyor in St. Augustine, Florida, right?
So imagine it's the late 1800s. St. Augustine. It's hot, it's humid, the air is thick enough to chew on. Elias is a municipal surveyor, a real by-the-book guy, hired to map out the expansion of the city's drainage system.
Standard civil engineering, nothing strange about that.
He's out there with his crew, sweating through their wool shirts, digging a trench near the coast.
And in Florida, you dig down, you expect sand, maybe some limestone bedrock. If you go deep enough, that's it.
That's all you should find. They're digging a trench. 3 feet, sand. 6 feet, wet sand. But then, at 12 feet down, which is incredibly deep for a drainage ditch in the 1800s, the shovel hit something, not a thud.
A clang.
A loud clang. So they stop. They start clearing away the muck. And the soil is weird. It's this fine, gray, silty clay that doesn't look like the local soil at all. And they unearth the top of an archway, a red brick archway.
Okay, now finding a brick in the ground, especially in an old city like St. Augustine, isn't inherently conspiracy-worthy, Spanish colonial stuff.
That's what Elias thought at first. Oh, we found an old Spanish foundation. But he's a surveyor. He's meticulous. He keeps digging. He clears the entire arch, and he realizes the masonry is flawless.
What do you mean by flawless?
The mortar joints are razor thin. It's not the rough, hand-hewn colonial stuff you see all over the city. It's machine precise. And as he clears more away, he realizes it's not a foundation for a wall. It's the top of a window frame.
A window frame. 12 feet underground.
12 feet down. And Elias, he's just looking at this thing, and he notes in his private journals, which we have excerpts from, that the bricks seem to possess a strange resonance. He described intricate geometric patterns in the brick layout that seemed to create this low humming sound when the coastal wind hit the trench just right.
That detail about the humming is incredibly important. It sounds like madness, but you have to hold on to that thought.
Elias became obsessed. He started digging rogue test pits all over the city on his own time. And he found the same thing everywhere. First floors of buildings buried deep underground, entire streets that were actually the roofs of older structures.
Wow.
He came to this terrifying conclusion. St. Augustine wasn't built by the settlers, it was dug out. He believed the city was reclaimed.
What?
He thought a massive global inundation of mud had wiped a high-tech civilization off the map just decades prior, and the current population was just living on the ruins, like hermit crabs moving to empty shells.
And how did that theory go over with his superiors?
Badly. He died penniless. Everyone thought he was completely crazy. But his final journal entry is just chilling. He wrote that the rising tides weren't a new phenomenon, but the sea finally finishing what the mud floods started.
See, Elias's story is the perfect entry point because it localizes what these sources claim is a global phenomenon. When we look at the source material, specifically the investigations by Agent and Pro, Elias wasn't alone in finding these anomalies.
Not by a long shot.
Between 1840 and 1880, there is this bizarre, synchronized global event.
It's not just Florida. It's St. Petersburg, Warsaw, Paris, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco.
All of them. And the official story for all these cities is that they engaged in massive street raising or regrading projects.
Right.
The narrative is always, we had drainage issues or we needed to modernize the sewers. So they supposedly jacked up entire city blocks or brought in millions of tons of earth to raise the street level.
Okay, because I looked into the Chicago story specifically, and it broke my brain. The official history books, the ones we learned in school, say that in the 1850s and 60s, Chicago literally lifted the city.
Oh.
They used thousands of jack screws. There are these elaborate drawings of massive hotels being lifted into the air while people were still inside eating dinner.
It's presented as this great triumph of Victorian engineering, a true marvel.
But just think about the logistics of that for 1 second. We struggle to fix a pothole in 6 months today. You're telling me that in the 1860s, with horse-drawn wagons and manual screw jacks, they coordinated the simultaneous lifting of an entire metropolitan downtown.
And without cracking the masonry, without destroying the plumbing.
And they did it in multiple cities around the world at the exact same time. It doesn't make any sense.
That is precisely where the skepticism in the sources comes in. The Agent and Pro transcript argues that the logistics are not just difficult, they are physically impossible. The labor, the costs, the sheer physics of it don't add up.
So what's their hypothesis?
It's much simpler, though much more disturbing. These weren't construction projects, they were excavation projects.
So they weren't raising the streets. They were digging the buildings out of the mud.
The engineering logs from that era are filled with these weird complaints about hitting deep foundations that don't make sense or ancient stone layers that predate the official founding of the cities.
And this explains the cultural layers we see today. You know when you walk around a city like Boston or London and you look down at a basement apartment?
Yeah, and you see the window is half cut off by the sidewalk.
Exactly. Look closer next time you see that. Why would an architect design a window that looks directly into a wall of dirt? Why would you build a beautiful, ornate door that opens into a soil bank?
The argument here is that those weren't originally basements, they were the first floors. The ground level rose catastrophically and rapidly.
So the mud flood wasn't just water, it was soil liquefaction.
The soil composition found deep underground in these cities, like that gray clay Elias found, suggests a sudden liquid soil event. Liquefaction is what happens during a massive earthquake, where the ground literally turns to soup for a few minutes.
And everything just sinks.
The buildings sink, the mud rehardens, and then we, the survivors or the inheritors, come along, dig out the top floors, call them the ground floor, and pretend we built the whole thing.
Because if this is true, it means our entire architectural history is a lie. We didn't build the Capitol buildings. We didn't build the cathedrals. We found them.
And that leads us to the name that keeps appearing in all these documents, Tartaria.
Right, I've seen the old maps. Grand Tartary. It covers these huge chunks of Russia and Central Asia. I always just assumed it was what they call the Mongol Empire or something.
That's the mainstream historical explanation, a vague geographical label for nomadic tribes. But the sources we're looking at, particularly One World, One America and Tartaria X, define Tartaria very, very differently. They describe it as a global, high-tech civilization that was essentially erased from history. A unified world order that built these incredible Greco-Roman style cities all over the planet, from Washington, D.C. to Moscow to Sydney.
And the Mud Flood was the reset button, the event that wiped them out.
Correct. The inheritance theory posits that our current civilization didn't build these grand structures. We are the squatters. We moved into the empty house, changed the locks, and then wrote a history book claiming we built it from scratch.
Which brings me to what I think is the creepiest part of this entire stack of research, the Orphan Trains.
I knew we'd get here. This is where the reset theory gets very dark and very personal.
And actually had to put the tablet down and walk away for a bit. So in the mid-19th century, right inside this mud flood window of 1840 to 1880, there's a massive, unexplained explosion in the population of orphans.
Specifically in the U.S. and Europe.
Hundreds of thousands of children with no parents. And the government's solution is to put them on trains.
The orphan trains. They shipped them from the East Coast cities out to the Midwest, basically giving them away to farming families who needed cheap labor. The official story is it was because of poverty, immigration, disease.
But the sources point to something else entirely. Yeah. They connected to the World's Fairs. We've all seen the photos of the incubator babies at the fairs, right?
Yes. Usually presented as a medical marvel. Look at this new technology. We can save premature babies.
But I looked at the photos in the source stack. These weren't hospitals. They were sideshows. They were on the fairgrounds, next to the Ferris wheel. Rows and rows of incubators with live babies in them. People bought tickets to look at them. And the sources ask a very simple, very disturbing question. Where were the parents?
The implication being that there were no parents.
Right. If a cataclysm like the mud flood wiped out the adult population, the Tartarians, were these children the survivors? Or, and this is the part that gave me chills, were they being grown? Was this a repopulation effort?
It ties directly into the idea of a hard reset. If you want to erase a civilization completely, you don't just destroy the buildings, you have to break the lineage.
You wipe out the adults who remember the old world.
Yes, the ones who remember the free energy, the advanced tech. You take the children, or you engineer a new generation, and you raise them with a completely new history. You tell them, we built this, we are the pinnacle of progress, and they have no memory of what came before.
It makes the mud flood sound less like a natural disaster and more like a crime scene cleanup.
And if we connect this back to Elias, the surveyor in St. Augustine, remember what he said in his journal, the rising sea is just the finishing move.
Right.
The agent and pro source explicitly frames the current sea level anomalies not as anthropogenic climate change, but as a geological instability left over from this mud flood event. The Earth hasn't fully settled yet.
So Mar-a-Lago sinking isn't about carbon footprints in this view. It's about the ground itself still being unstable from the last reset.
Or it's about the gatekeepers initiating the next phase of the plan. Which brings us to the technology. Remember, Elias heard the bricks humming. Why would a brick hum?
That's the transition right there. We have to move from the mud to the machine. Because if this past civilization didn't build these incredible cities just for shelter, what were they for?
What was their true function?
Exactly. And I want to pivot to the Antarctica story now.
The Queen Maud land logs.
This is our second major narrative thread. We have these leaked personal letters from a climate researcher who spent 3 winters in Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. His official job was to study ice cores stuff.
But his letters home, they start getting very strange very fast.
He starts talking about something he calls the harmonic bleed.
Right.
He's out on the ice miles and miles from any civilization. And he says the ice isn't behaving like ice. He describes the entire ice sheet as a crystalline dampener.
A dampener for what?
For a frequency. He says that when he sets up his seismic equipment, he's not just getting tectonic rumblings. He's picking up a continuous low-frequency thrum coming from beneath the ice.
And he was sure it wasn't geological.
He was convinced it wasn't. He claimed the glaciers are actually the cooling fins of an ancient global energy grid. He called it Antiquitech. He believed the ice was put there or formed there, specifically to stabilize the planetary resonance, to keep the engine from overheating, essentially.
This aligns perfectly with the One World, One America source. It talks extensively about the physics of this lost civilization. The consensus in the Tartaria community is that they didn't burn coal, they didn't use oil, they harvested aether.
Okay, we need to pause and define that. Yep. Aether. I feel like that's a word people throw around and it can mean anything. Is it magic? Is it a ghost?
No, think of it as ambient atmospheric electricity. The air around us is charged. We know this lightning is the most obvious and violent example, but there is a constant electrical potential difference between the ground and the ionosphere. The theory is that the Tartarians had the technology to tap into this field, to pull usable electricity directly out of the air anywhere on Earth for free.
And the buildings themselves were the machines that did this.
The cathedrals, the capitals, the mosques, just look at their design. They all have these massive domes. They have copper roofs. They have metal spires reaching into the sky.
I always thought the gold leaf on the domes was just bling, a display of wealth. Look at us. We have so much money. We pave a roof with it.
That's what they want you to think. Opulence, religion. But what are gold and copper? They're two of the most conductive materials on Earth. The theory is that the dome acts as a capacitor, the spire acts as an antenna, and the entire building is a circuit board set in stone.
And the star forts fit into this.
This is where it gets into cymatics, which is just incredible.
Okay, explain that like I'm 5.
Right. Have you ever seen those videos online where someone puts sand on a metal plate, and then they run a violin bow across the edge, or hook it up to a speaker playing a specific tone?
Yeah. And the sand jumps around and forms these perfect, intricate geometric patterns.
That is cymatics. It's a way of visualizing sound and frequency. Now, go look at a diagram of a star fort from above. Look at the Citadel of Alessandria or Fort McHenry in Baltimore. They are perfect, complex, geometric stars.
Historians always say that shape was for deflecting cannonballs.
Which never made any sense to me. Flat walls are better for that. Those sharp angles just create weak points for cannon fire to shatter. Right. But if you look at a cymatic plate vibrating at a specific frequency, say 432 hertz, which is a key frequency in these theories, the sand forms that exact star shape.
So the forts weren't defensive.
They were resonant. They were power plants. They were always built near water. The moats weren't for defense. Water conducts vibration. There were huge stone resonators designed to amplify the Earth's natural frequency and distribute that aether energy wirelessly across the grid.
So the entire world was a wireless charger.
Yes, a free, clean, wireless energy grid powered by the planet itself.
And the researcher in Antarctica, he thinks the ice is a critical part of this machine.
He thinks the ice is the stabilizer. Crystals hold frequency. If the Earth is a resonator, the massive ice sheets at the poles act as the dampeners to keep the frequency stable, to keep the hum from becoming a destructive scream.
But he said the ice is melting, and he didn't think it was just from global warming.
He called it sabotage. In his letters, he claimed the gatekeepers, the people running the show now, are intentionally melting the ice, that they are targeting it with specific frequencies to break down the crystalline structure.
But why? Why would you destroy a free energy grid?
To keep the meter running.
It always comes down to money.
Money and control. You can't put a meter on the aether. If the cathedral downtown is broadcasting free power to everyone in the city, you can't charge them for it. The narrative in these sources is that the Industrial Revolution, coal, oil, wires, was a deliberate step backward technologically.
To create scarcity.
Yes. They destroyed the free energy grid, suppressed the technology, and forced us onto a scarcity-based system where we have to pay them for every single watt we use.
This connects directly to those inventors mentioned in the source stack, Keely and Bedini.
John Keely, late 19th century. He built a motor that he claimed ran on etheric force. It was all about sound vibration. He demonstrated it for investors. It lifted massive weights. It disintegrated stone with frequency. Then he died. His lab was raided, and all his papers vanished.
And Bedini.
John Bedini, much more recent, 1980s and 90s, he worked on what he called cold electricity. He designed circuits that could charge batteries using scalar waves from the environment. He claimed he could build a self-running system that would keep a battery charged indefinitely.
What happened to him?
He was ridiculed by the mainstream, harassed, and his tech never made it to market. It's the same pattern over and over again. Free energy is impossible, now go buy more oil.
And the researcher in Antarctica believed that the melt is the final phase of this sabotage. They're destroying the cooling fins of the old machine to make sure it can never be turned back on.
But there's another angle to the melting ice that's even stranger, right? The Piri Reis map.
Yes. The map that shouldn't exist. So this is a genuine map drawn on gazelle skin from 1513. It was found in a library in Istanbul, and it shows the coastline of Antarctica.
But not as a jagged ice shelf.
No. It shows it as land, with rivers, with mountains, an ice-free coastline.
And the craziest part is when modern science uses ground-penetrating radar to look through the miles of ice, the landmass underneath, it matches the map.
Which implies that in 1513, Antarctica was green. Or at least parts of it were.
Or at least ice-free, which creates a massive timeline problem for the official narrative. If Antarctica was green just 500 years ago, then the whole millions of years of ice story is a lie.
And this leads directly to the ice wall theory. We don't have to go full flat Earth here to find this interesting, but the Reddit threads in the source stack raise a good point. They talk about the ice as a containment zone.
Right. Whether the Earth is a globe or a plane, the theory is that the ice at the poles isn't just a weather feature, it's a barrier. And the gatekeepers are terrified of the ice melting, not because the water is rising, but because of what it will reveal.
The lands beyond.
Or the ruins beneath. If the Piri Reis map is accurate, there was a major civilization down there, maybe the central hub of the Tartarian power grid. If the ice melts, the evidence is exposed. The crime scene is thawed out for everyone to see.
So they use the fear of the flood, the water's rising, run for your lives, to keep us looking at the water instead of looking at what the water is uncovering.
It's a classic magician's trick, misdirection. Which brings us to the third and final piece of this puzzle. We've talked about the ground, which is the mud flood. We've talked about the energy, which is the ice. Now we have to talk about time itself. Because if the geography is a lie, and the tech is stolen, what year is it really?
This is where I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I want to bring in the story of the maritime lawyer from Miami.
The one handling the doomed property cases? This is a wild one.
Yes. This is our third story. This guy is a shark. High-end real estate law. He was handling these complex cases for people being displaced by projected sea level rise in Florida. You know, the 70-meter rise scenario we read about in the intro.
The official Florida is going to disappear narrative that we see in the news all the time?
Exactly. But he started noticing a really strange pattern in the deeds and the sales records. While the news is screaming, Florida is drowning, the ultra-elites, the people he calls the gatekeepers, are quietly buying up the land.
And not just any land.
No. They are buying specific coastal zones that are supposedly going to be underwater in 10 years. For pennies on the dollar.
That's the Mar-a-Lago Paradox all over again. Right. Why would you buy a sinking ship?
Unless you know it's not sinking. Or, and this was his theory, unless you know the water level is just shifting. The lawyer had this idea. He called the sea level narrative a phantom in time psychological operation.
What?
PSYOP. He believed that the water isn't just rising, it's moving to reveal old geography, pre-19th century coastlines.
Tartarian coastlines.
Yes. He claimed that under the water, just off the current coast, are the ruins of the old world. Star forts, ports, ancient infrastructure. And the elites want to claim all of it before the rest of us even realize it's there. He said the climate crisis is a massive distraction from something he called phantom time.
Phantom time. This is a real hypothesis put forward by a German historian named Herbert Illig. It's referenced in the Thought Catalog source.
And this is the idea that the Middle Ages just didn't happen.
Specifically, the years 614 AD to 911 AD, roughly 300 years. Illig argues they were fabricated, inserted into the calendar by the Holy Roman Emperor, the Pope, and the Byzantine Emperor to align their reigns with biblical significance and consolidate power.
Wait, how do you just fake 300 years? What about all the people who lived then? What about Charlemagne, Alfred the Great?
The theory argues they are fictional characters, or amalgams of other real rulers from different time periods. Illig points to the archaeology. He argues that if you look at the strata, the layers in the ground, there is a massive unexplained gap.
A gap.
You have Roman artifacts, and then you have High Middle Ages artifacts. The Dark Ages are dark, he claims, because there is literally nothing there. No architecture evolution, no massive layer of pottery shards. It's like history just jumped forward 300 years.
So if those years are fake, What year is it really?
If we subtract roughly 300 years from our current date, we aren't in 2026. We're in the early 1700s.
That breaks my brain. But in the context of Tartaria and the Mud Flood, it actually makes things fit together better.
It compresses the timeline dramatically. It means the fall of Rome and the Mud Flood might be the same event or very close together. It brings the ancient high-tech civilization much closer to our own time. It means the ruins Elias found in Florida aren't thousands of years old. They might be from just a few generations ago.
And someone is actively managing this fraudulent timeline. The Tartaria X source mentions a specific decree from 1944.
This is a very specific, very verifiable document. August 9th, 1944. The Central Committee of the Communist Party in Moscow issues an official decree.
In the middle of World War II, what were they focused on?
History. They ordered the party committees in the region of Tatarstan to scientifically revise the history of the Tatars.
Revise it how?
To eliminate all references to the Golden Horde and Great Tartary.
Okay.
To rebrand the Tatars as primitive, warring nomads, and to claim that all the significant architectural achievements in the region were Russian or Slavic in origin.
They literally ordered a top-down rewrite of history.
And the CIA knew all about it. The source cites a 1957 CIA document that acknowledges this Soviet revisionism in detail. But the U.S. didn't say a word publicly.
The Cold War was just getting started. Why not expose the Soviets as liars and propagandists?
Because, according to the theory, the West was doing the exact same thing. They were all co-inheritors of this stolen, buried world. If the Soviets admitted they didn't build the Kremlin, that it was a repurposed Tartarian star fort, then the Americans might have to admit they didn't build the Capitol or the White House.
It's mutually assured destruction of the official narrative.
A gentleman's agreement. We won't tell if you won't.
And this brings us back to the World's Fairs. Because if you've inherited all these magnificent empty cities and you can't admit you just found them, what do?
You hold a fair. Chicago, 1893. St. Louis, 1904. San Francisco, 1915. You take the existing Tartarian ruins, these massive domed electric cities, you patch them up, you paint them white, and you invite the public.
You say, look what we built. Look at the marvel of our new age.
Right. And the official story is that they built these colossal cities in just 2 years out of plaster and hemp, just to be temporary attractions.
Staff. That's what they call the material. A mixture of plaster and fiber. But you look at the photographs. These aren't flimsy movie sets. They are colossal. The level of detail, the statuary, the enormous water features, the idea that they built the White City in Chicago in a couple of years with horse-drawn wagons is ludicrous.
It's just not plausible.
And then, after the fair is over, they burn them to the ground.
Almost every single one of these major world fairs ended in a tragic fire, or they were demolished immediately after closing.
That's the cleanup again. It's the same pattern. You show the people the amazing technology, you take credit for it, and then you destroy the evidence so nobody can look too closely at the humming bricks.
You leave a few souvenirs behind. The Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Just enough to be monuments, but they're disconnected from their original function as parts of a larger machine.
It is the ultimate gaslighting. We built this incredible, magnificent world, but then we decide to throw it all away for fun.
It establishes the narrative of the new power. We are the builders, when in reality, they were just the demolition crew.
We have the mud flood covering the ground, we have the ice sabotage destroying the energy grid, and we have phantom time hiding the true history. And now, today, we have the climate crisis.
Which the Miami lawyer argues is the mechanism for the final stage of control, mass migration. If you can convince everyone that the coasts are drowning, they will move. You empty the land. You herd people away from these coastal zones, these energy-rich areas with buried history.
And you move them into smart cities, dense, monitored, controlled environments.
The One World source talks about this at length, the 15-minute city concept. It's all about density and control. You can't have people wandering around the countryside digging up red brick arches in their backyard like Elias did. You can't have them exploring the melting Antarctic coast and finding ruins. You need them contained.
Dependent
on the state for energy, for food, for information. Unable to be self-sufficient.
It's the orphan train concept. But for the entire population, you sever the connection to the land, you sever the connection to the past.
And you create a population that lives in a perpetual now. A population that believes history began with the Industrial Revolution and will end with the climate apocalypse. They have no idea that there was a third option, a Tartarian option.
A world of free energy and harmonic resonance.
A world we lost, or rather, a world that was taken from us.
This has been absolutely mind-bending. I mean, we've gone from a buried brick arch in Florida to a frequency dampener in Antarctica to a missing 300 years of our own history. And I know, for a lot of people listening, this sounds insane. It sounds like a movie script.
It does, and I'm not asking anyone to believe every single word of this is gospel. Maybe the Earth is flat, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's 2026, maybe it's 1726. The specific details, in a way, matter less than the doubt they create.
The doubt about the official story.
Exactly. The power of this kind of deep dive is that it forces you to look at your world differently. It forces you to walk past an old post office with a copper roof and a spire and ask, did we really build that with horses and pulleys?
It forces you to look at a basement window half buried in the sidewalk and ask, is that a strange design choice or is that a buried history?
And it forces you to look at the climate headlines, the fear, the panic, the calls for radical change and ask, is this science or is this social management?
It encourages you to be an archaeologist of your own reality, to not just accept the plaque on the side of the building.
Never trust the plaque. Dig a little deeper.
Look for the windows in the ground.
And listen to the ice.
I think we've definitely given everyone something to mull over the next time they see a headline about sea levels or a historic renovation happening downtown.
Indeed. And I'd like to leave you with one final thought, a way to frame all of this. We've talked about the soil, the ice, and the calendar. Yes. We spend our lives believing that the ground beneath our feet is the one thing we can trust, solid, permanent, and understood. But if the soil in our cities is actually a shroud covering a stolen past, and if the ice at the poles is a machine we are dismantling piece by piece, then we aren't just living through a climate crisis. We are living in the aftermath of a crime scene that spans the entire planet, walking through the ruins of a home we were made to forget we ever owned.